What if I told you there's a moment in your life where you'll have to choose between obeying and doing what's right? A moment where following the rules might mean betraying everything you believe in. March 1945. In the devastated jungles of the Philippines, as World War II entered its final and most brutal chapters, a young American sergeant, just 24 years old, received the cruelest order a soldier could ever hear. An order that would test not only his courage, but the very essence of what it means to be human amidst the chaos of war. Imagine the scene for a second. You're there, in uniform, covered in mud and blood, surrounded by wounded comrades groaning in pain. 23 men, 23 lives depending on you, and then your commander, the one you swore to obey, looks you in the eye and says the words that will haunt your conscience forever. Abandon them. Leave them here to die. That's an order. So what would you do? Have you ever been through this? Not necessarily on a battlefield, but in moments where doing the right thing meant challenging authority, risking everything, going against the current. Because this is a story about one of those moments. A moment where disobedience was not an act of rebellion, but rather the purest and most genuine act of heroism that war has ever witnessed. Stay with me until the end of this story, because what you're about to discover might surprise you, and perhaps even change the way you see courage, loyalty, and the true meaning of never leaving anyone behind. That day, in the humid and hostile jungles of the Pacific, as American troops retreated before the advancing enemy, a young sergeant named James Callahan, Jimmy to his friends, faced the most important decision of his life. He wasn't a superhero. He had no superpowers. He was just a boy from rural Kentucky, the son of humble farmers who grew up believing that you don't abandon your family. And there, in that moment of absolute terror, those 23 wounded men were his family. The order was clear. The military logic was impeccable. Carrying seriously wounded soldiers across 8 kilometers of hostile territory with the enemy surrounding the area would be suicide. It would mean risking not only 4 lives, but potentially the entire company. It was the cold mathematics of war. Sacrifice some to save many. Colonel Bradford, their commander, wasn't being cruel. He was being practical. He was following the manual, making the decision that generals have been making for centuries on battlefields around the world. But something inside Jimmy screamed louder than any military order, something that transcended hierarchy, protocol, and even survival instinct. Perhaps it was the values his parents instilled in him since childhood. Perhaps it was the desperate look in the eyes of those men, some only 19 years old, whispering the names of mothers and girlfriends as they bled onto the wet ground. Or perhaps it was simply the profound certainty that there are things worse than dying, like living knowing you abandoned your brothers when they needed you most. And then, in that moment that seemed to last an eternity, while the sound of explosions echoed in the distance and time slipped away like sand through one's fingers, Jimmy Callahan did something that would change not only the fate of those 23 men, but would resonate through generations as a testament to what a human being is capable of when choosing courage over fear. But what exactly did he do? How did a single man, with only 3 volunteers by his side, manage to defy the impossible and transform a death sentence into one of the most extraordinary rescue missions in American military history? But what exactly did he do? How did a single man, with only 3 volunteers by his side, manage to defy the impossible and transform a death sentence into one of the most extraordinary rescue missions in American military history? Before I tell you this incredible and part of the story, I need to ask you something. If you're still with me, if this story is touching something deep inside you, leave a comment below about what has resonated with you so far. Seriously, have you ever had to choose between obeying and doing the right thing? Have you ever felt alone defending something you believed in? Write it down below. I read all the comments, And they show me that these stories aren't just about the past. They're about us, about the choices we make every day. And look, if you believe that real stories of courage, transformation, and overcoming deserve to be shared, leave a like below. Because your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people who need to hear this. Every like, every comment, every share is a way of saying this message matters. This story needs to be told. Yeah, and if you want to be part of this community that values authentic stories of people who have transformed pain into purpose, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. Every week I bring content like this, which not only informs but touches the heart and makes us reflect on who we want to be. Because deep down, this story of Sergeant Jimmy Callahan isn't just his, it's ours too. It's about every time we've had to choose between the easy way and the right way, between safety and courage, between silence and the voice that needed to be heard. Now, going back to that crucial moment in March 1945, when Jimmy looked at his commander and said the words that would change everything. Now, going back to that crucial moment in March 1945, when Jimmy looked at his commander and said the words that would change everything. But before we get to that exact point of decision, you need to understand the hell these men were going through. Because the hidden truth about the war in the Pacific is that it wasn't just a battle against enemy soldiers. It was a war against nature itself, against tropical diseases that devoured men faster than bullets, against the hunger that turned strong soldiers into walking skeletons, and against utter abandonment in a territory that seemed designed to kill anyone who dared to cross it. The Philippines in 1945 was a living nightmare. Imagine jungles so dense that sunlight could barely penetrate, suffocating humidity that caused sweat to pour continuously, making it impossible to keep anything dry. Weapons rusted, wounds became infected, and the very sanity of the men began to slip away. Malaria decimated entire battalions. Men died not only from gunshot wounds, but from dysentery, from infections that turned small cuts into fatal gangrene, from fevers so high they deliriously called for mothers halfway around the world. And the enemy? They were everywhere and nowhere. Ambushes appeared out of nowhere. Explosive traps hidden under leaves, snipers camouflaged in the treetops, only noticed when the man next to you collapsed with a hole in his skull. It was a type of psychological warfare that broke even the bravest soldiers. You never knew if the next step would be your last, if the next breath would be your final one. And with each passing day, the hope of returning home diminished a little more. In this scenario of absolute chaos, where death was the only certainty and survival was a daily miracle, the soldiers clung to one thing: each other. Because when you're in hell, the only thing that keeps you going are the men by your side, your brothers, those who share the same mud, the same fear, the same desperate desire to see another sunrise. And it is precisely in this context that you need to know who James Callahan was. Jimmy, because understanding who he was before that moment of decision helps us understand why he did what he did. Jimmy wasn't a general's son. He didn't come from prestigious military academies. He hadn't grown up dreaming of being a war hero. He was just a boy from rural Kentucky, from a small town called Harlan, where everyone knew everyone, and your word was worth more than any written contract. The son of humble farmers, Jimmy grew up working the land for as long as he could hold a hoe. He would wake before sunrise to feed the animals, spend his days harvesting tobacco under the scorching Kentucky summer sun, and go to bed with calloused hands and an exhausted body. But do you know what his father always said, sitting on that old wooden porch every night? Jimmy, you may not have much in this life, but never break your word. And never, ever let down someone who counts on you. Those words were etched into Jimmy's soul as if tattooed in fire. Loyalty wasn't just a nice concept to him. It was the foundation of everything. It was the code that defined who he was. In small-town Harlan, you looked out for your own. When Mr. Peterson broke his leg during the harvest, it was the Callahans who worked overtime to ensure his crop wasn't lost. When the storm destroyed the Williams barn, it was Jimmy, just 16 years old, who organized the neighbors to rebuild it in a week. And then there was Sarah. Sarah Miller, the girl with brown hair and green eyes, who had made Jimmy's heart race since high school. They had been dating for 5 years when the war broke out. Jimmy remembers perfectly the night he proposed to Sarah, 2 days before he left for basic training. It was under the same oak tree where they had their first kiss, with a simple ring that had cost 3 months of savings. Sarah cried, said yes, and held his face in her hands, saying, "You'll come back to me, Jimmy Callahan. You promised me a life together, so you'll come back." He promised, and Jimmy Callahan didn't break promises. But there, in the Philippines, having just turned 24, carrying in his uniform pocket a faded photo of Sarah and a crumpled letter she had written, Jimmy was about to face a situation where all his promises would be tested to the limit. It was almost 4 o'clock in the afternoon when Colonel Bradford summoned the sergeants for an emergency meeting. The news was terrible. Enemy forces were converging on their position much faster than intelligence had predicted. They had, at most, until nightfall, to completely evacuate the area, or they would be surrounded and annihilated. The decision was clear: immediate retreat. All men fit to march should leave within the next 2 hours. It was then that Colonel Bradford said something that made Jimmy's blood run cold. "We have 23 seriously wounded who can't walk. Carrying stretchers across this terrain would make us easy targets and delay the entire operation. The decision was made at the command level. We'll leave supplies and ammunition with them. It's the best we can do." Silence. A silence so heavy it seemed to suck all the oxygen from the makeshift room. Jimmy looked around. The other sergeants avoided eye contact. Some stared at their own feet. Others clenched their fists so tightly their knuckles turned white. They all knew what it meant. Leaving them wasn't giving them a chance to survive. It was a death sentence in a more palatable package. "Sir," Jimmy heard his own voice, somewhat hoarse, "these men fought for us. They bled by our side. We can't just—" "Sergeant Callahan," Colonel Bradford cut him off, and there was weariness in his voice, not anger. A weariness that came from making impossible decisions day after day. "Do you think I want to do this? Do you think any of us want to? But it's the mathematics of war. It's 23 lives against 247. If we stay, everyone dies. If we leave now, most survive. There's no choice here." But there was. Jimmy knew there was. There's always a choice. Even when all the options seem terrible, you still choose which terrible thing you can live with afterward. And Jimmy knew, with a certainty that burned deep in his chest, that he couldn't live knowing he'd abandoned those men. He couldn't look in the mirror. He couldn't go back to Harlan, marry Sarah, build a life, knowing he'd left 23 brothers behind to die alone and terrified in a jungle on the other side of the world. The meeting ended. The orders were given. The evacuation would begin in 90 minutes. Jimmy walked over to where the wounded were being held. It was a scene from a war hospital. Men lying on dirty tarps, some moaning softly, others in disturbing silence. There was Private Patterson, 19 years old, with shrapnel lodged in his abdomen. Corporal Rodriguez, who had lost a leg 3 days ago and whose infection was beginning to take hold. Young Williams, God, he was only 18, with a gunshot wound to the lung that made each breath sound like he was drowning. They knew, from the way the nurses avoided looking directly at them, from the way some soldiers came to say goodbye, shaking hands too tightly, whispering words that sounded like last words. They knew they were being left behind. And the look in their eyes, pure fear, resignation, and worst of all, understanding. As if they were saying, "It's okay. We understand. Save yourselves." But Jimmy didn't understand. he wouldn't accept it. He'd grown up learning that you don't abandon your own, no matter the cost, no matter the risk. His father had stayed up 3 nights in a row by his bedside when Jimmy had pneumonia at age 7. His mother had sold her only gold necklace to pay the doctor when his younger brother broke his arm. In Harlan, you took care of your own, always, without exception. And it was in that moment, looking at those faces, too young to be dying so far from home, that Jimmy made the decision that would define not only his own fate, but the fate of 23 souls the world had already considered lost. He didn't know if he would survive. He didn't know if he could, but he knew he had to try, because some things are more important than his own life. And honor, loyalty, love for his brothers, those things transcended even the fear of death. Jimmy found Colonel Bradford making the final preparations for the retreat. The commander was checking maps, giving quick orders, his face a mask of professional determination that barely concealed the anguish beneath. When he saw Jimmy approaching, something in his eyes already seemed to know what was coming. "Colonel Bradford, sir," Jimmy said, keeping his voice steady even though his heart was pounding like a war drum in his chest. "With all due respect, sir, I'm not leaving you here." Time seemed to stand still. Other officers turned to look. The noise of preparations around them seemed to diminish. Colonel Bradford stared at Jimmy for long seconds, and there was something complex in that look. Surprise, yes, but also something that seemed like respect mixed with concern. "Sergeant," Bradford said slowly, "do you understand that this is outright disobedience to an order? Do you understand the consequences?" "I understand, sir. Court-martial when we return. If we return." Jimmy swallowed hard. "But I understand even more that I can't leave those men to die. I can't, sir. I'm not made that way." "You're going to die there," Bradford said, and there was no threat in his voice, only fact. "They're badly wounded. You'll never get them out in time. The enemy will surround the area in a matter of hours." "So I die trying, sir, but at least I die knowing that I didn't abandon them." There was a heavy silence. And then something unexpected happened. Private Marcus Chen, a sniper from California, stepped forward. "I'll go with him, sir." His voice was calm, determined. Soon after, Corporal Thomas O'Brien, an Irish-American from Boston known for his immense strength, stepped forward. "Me too." And then young David Martinez, just 22 years old, from somewhere in Texas. "Count me in. 4 men, 23 wounded, 8 kilometers of hostile jungle, 6 hours before the enemy encirclement. It was an impossible mission by any definition of the word. It was suicide, it was madness, but it was the right thing to do, and all 4 men there knew it in their hearts." Colonel Bradford looked at those 4 soldiers, those 4 brave fools who were choosing almost certain death for the sake of their comrades. Tears, yes, tears, welled in the corners of the war-hardened commander's eyes. He stepped forward, and in a voice low enough for only them to hear, said, "Officially, I can't authorize this, but unofficially..." He paused, pulled a map from his pocket and traced a route with his finger. "This path has fewer reported enemy patrols, and there's a stream 3 kilometers away that can provide cover. If you can reach the extraction zone by 10 o'clock tonight, I'll make sure someone is still waiting." This was Bradford's way of helping without disobeying orders from high command. It was his small rebellion, his way of saying that he also didn't like abandoning men, but that his hands were tied by a chain of command that saw soldiers as numbers in reports. And so began one of the most impressive rescue operations that World War II ever witnessed. Jimmy and his 3 companions had less than 6 hours to carry 23 wounded men across 8 kilometers of hostile territory. They had no adequate stretchers, they had insufficient medical equipment, they had nothing but determination, improvisation, and an absolute refusal to give up. The first thing they did was improvise stretchers. Using sturdy jungle branches, torn uniforms and parachute cords, they built makeshift but functional structures. Some wounded men could lean on the men's shoulders, others had to be carried completely. The math was brutal. 4 healthy men for 23 wounded. They would have to make multiple trips or find a way to move them all at once. Jimmy made the hardest decision. They would all move together, even if it was slower, more dangerous. Because leaving some behind, even temporarily, was exactly what they were fighting against. It was all or none. That was the rule. The first kilometer was pure agony. The wounded groaned with every jolt, each step torture for men with broken bones. Bullets still lodged in their bodies, infections burning in their wounds. Marcus Chen, in the vanguard, silently signaled when there were signs of enemy movement. Thomas O'Brien, with his superhuman strength, carried 2 men simultaneously when necessary, sweat streaming down his flushed face. David Martinez murmured prayers in Spanish as he helped carry Private Patterson, whose breathing was growing weaker. And Jimmy was everywhere at once, checking on each wounded man, whispering encouragement, distributing the little water they had, adjusting stretchers, making split-second decisions about which route to take. He had become, at that moment, more than a sergeant. He had become the living hope of those men. At the 2-kilometer mark, they heard the first distant shot. The enemy was closer than they expected. Jimmy signaled for everyone to stop, breaths held, hearts pounding so loudly they seemed to echo through the jungle. A patrol passed within 50 meters of them. 50 meters, the distance of half a football field. If any of the wounded groaned, if anyone coughed, if there was any sound, they would all be dead. 3 minutes that felt like 3 hours. And then, silence. The patrol had passed. God, or fate, or pure luck, whatever it was on their side. For now. At the 3rd kilometer, they reached the creek that Colonel Bradford had mentioned. The water was chest deep, the current strong, the rocks slippery, and they had to cross it, keeping the wounded above water to avoid further infecting their wounds. It was at that moment that the true nature of what it meant to leave no one behind manifested itself in its most brutal and beautiful form. Thomas O'Brien went in first, carrying Private Williams on his shoulders like a child. The current nearly knocked him over twice, but he held firm, his muscles trembling with the effort but pressing on. Marcus Chen and David Martinez formed a human chain, passing wounded men from one to another. And Jimmy stayed last, making sure everyone got across until he himself entered the icy water that cut like knives, carrying Corporal Rodriguez, who had lost so much blood he was barely conscious. It was in the middle of the river that Rodriguez opened his eyes and looked at Jimmy. "Why?" he whispered. "Why are you doing this? You could be safe now." And Jimmy, with water up to his neck, shivering from cold and exhaustion, replied with something he didn't even know was inside him until it came out of his mouth. "Because you're my brother, and I don't abandon my brothers. Never." Rodriguez closed his eyes, but not before Jimmy saw the tears mingling with the river water. They weren't tears of pain. They were the tears of someone who had given up on himself, but was now being reminded that there were still people willing to fight for him. 4th kilometer, 5th. Night was falling rapidly, transforming the jungle into a labyrinth of shadows, where each tree seemed like an enemy soldier, each rustle of leaves sounded like the click of a gun being cocked. The muscles of all 4 healthy men were beyond exhaustion. Thomas O'Brien, the strongest of them, was limping. Marcus Chen's hands were raw from carrying so much. David Martinez was coughing up blood. He'd pulled something in the exertion, probably ruptured something internally. And Jimmy was operating purely on willpower. His body had given up miles ago, but his mind refused to accept it. He thought of Sarah, of his father on the porch saying, "Never abandon your own," of all those wounded who had placed their last hopes in 4 madmen who thought love was worth more than logic. It was at kilometer 6, when it was already completely dark, that everything collapsed. They heard voices, Japanese voices, many voices, flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. They had been surrounded. There was an enemy patrol in every direction they tried to go. They were less than 2 kilometers from the safe zone, so close that Jimmy could almost see it. But it may well have been the moon, so inaccessible did it seem at that moment. Comment below, don't give up, because that's exactly what Jimmy needed to remind himself during the darkest moment of that impossible mission. And here, at the moment when all seemed lost, when Jimmy and his 3 companions were surrounded with 23 lives depending on them, something happened that can only be described as a miracle. Remember that before losing radio contact, Jimmy had requested a distraction, an artillery bombardment at specific coordinates. He wasn't sure if the message had arrived. He had no way of knowing if anyone in command had even received his desperate request. But suddenly, the sky lit up. Explosions echoed less than 500 meters to the north. The Allied bombardment had arrived, late, but at the exact moment they needed it most. The enemy patrols surrounding them rushed toward the explosions, thinking it was the main attack. And there, in that window of precious minutes, Jimmy and his group moved like shadows through the darkness. The last 2 kilometers were covered in a near-trance state, feet moving on autopilot, muscles working beyond any reasonable human limit. And when they finally crossed into the safe zone, it wasn't 6 hours later anymore. It was 18 hours. 18 hours of hell, each second a choice between giving up or continuing. And when the sentinels at the Allied camp saw that group emerging from the darkness, 4 men practically crawling, carrying, pulling, supporting 23 wounded, there was a moment of absolute silence. And then, applause. Hardened warriors applauding, some with tears streaming down their faces, because they were witnessing something rare, something that war usually destroys: pure humanity, true love, boundless sacrifice. Colonel Bradford was there, waiting, as he had promised. And when his eyes met Jimmy's, there were no words, just a nod, a silent acknowledgement that sometimes disobeying is the most honorable thing you can do. All 23 arrived alive. 18 survived their wounds in the days and weeks that followed. 18 lives that the world had considered lost. 18 men who returned home, to their families, to their mothers and fathers and brothers and daughters and sons who would never have been born if it weren't for 4 men who refused to accept the inevitable. Jimmy received the Medal of Honor, but when the reporters came, when they wanted to turn him into a national hero, he refused. He returned to Harlan, to Kentucky, to Sarah, who was waiting for him under that oak tree as she had promised. They married in the summer of 1946. They lived a simple life, raised 3 children, and grew old together on that porch where Jimmy's father used to sit. But the story doesn't end there. Because of the 18 who survived, something extraordinary happened. Private Patterson became a medic, dedicating his life to saving others because someone had refused to give up on him. Rodriguez became a teacher, instructing thousands of young people about courage and character over 40 years. Williams, that 18-year-old boy, opened an orphanage, saying that if he had been given a second chance at life, he wanted to give chances to children who needed them. Every year, on the anniversary of the rescue, they would get together. At first, there were 18. Over time, the numbers dwindled. Life has its own clock. But while they could, they met, hugged, cried, laughed, and remembered the night 4 men decided that love was worth more than orders, that loyalty transcended logic, that some things are more important than their own survival. And this story of a soldier who disobeyed and saved lives that were already doomed teaches us something that echoes through 80 years and still resonates today. Sometimes doing the right thing means challenging the system. It means risking everything for what truly matters. Jimmy Callahan wasn't special. He didn't have superpowers. He was just a man who grew up believing that you don't abandon your own. And that simple belief changed the destiny of 23 lives and the hundreds of people those lives touched afterward. How many times in our daily lives do we have the chance to do the right thing even when it's difficult? How many times can we choose between the safe path and the right path? Jimmy's story reminds us that these choices define who we are. Not when things are easy, but precisely in the darkest moments, when it seems impossible, when all the signs say to give up. That's when our true character is revealed. If you've made it this far, if this story touched something deep inside you, write in the comments, "I don't abandon my people." Because I want to know that this message is resonating. And if you want to continue being part of this community that values real stories of transformation, of people who chose courage when it would have been easier to give up, subscribe to the channel. Every week I bring content like this, stories that not only inform, but that move us, that make us reflect on who we want to be. And if you felt that connection throughout this video, if you stayed here with me for these minutes immersing yourself in this journey, leave a like, because your support shows me that it's worth continuing to bring these stories that are sometimes forgotten, but that carry lessons that never get old. There's a video over here about another soldier who also faced the impossible and transformed trauma into purpose. Click and continue with me there, because the journey of transformation doesn't end here.